Och vi har skördat vetet. Och vi har skördat vetet. Vi har plockat citronerna. Och vi har plockat citronerna. Och pressat oliverna. Och pressat oliverna. Och hela världen känner till vår jord. Och hela världen känner till vår jord. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve, leve, leve Palestina. Leve Palestina och krossa sionismen.
Greetings of peace. You were listening to a Swedish song, Live Palestina och krossa Zioniste. It means long live Palestine and crush Zionism. My name is Shireen and I am a co-director of Peace Vigil. I welcome you today to the event on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. We are a peace education organization, which means we are engaged in creating, nurturing, and protecting a society where people coexist peacefully. We look at why discord happens and what can be done to ensure that difference does not lead to bigotry and violence in society. Today, we are coming together to show our solidarity with the Palestinian people on this International Day. As you're well aware, the Palestinian people in the recent 2 months have seen unprecedented hardships, which are the latest in almost 8 decades of violence against them by the Israeli state and its supporters. Let us first please take a moment to pay our respects to the thousands of lives lost over the years, mostly Palestinian, but also Israeli, and also some people who were neither Palestinian or Israeli, but happened to be in the region. As we do this, I will share with you 4 slides of data from the United Nations for the last 15 years only of deaths and injuries of Palestinians and Israelis. These figures are till 16th and 17th November. Since then, more people have been killed and maimed. We are showing you the figures right now. I will read it out to you. Palestinian dead, 2008 to 2023 till 17th November. Palestinian killed, 6,621. 2008 to 2023 till 16th November, Israelis killed, 311. 2008 to 2023 till November 17th, Palestinian injuries, 156,227. November 16th to 2023, starting from 2008, Israelis injured, 6,338. These figures that we have shown you are collected and compiled by the United Nations. In the latest spurt of violence from 7th October to now, over 14,500 Palestinians have been killed and about 1,400 Israelis. While each and every life lost to violence is a shame for humanity, we also clearly see here in the figures that Palestinian lives seem to be a much, much bigger casualty. We must also not forget that the Palestinians have no powerful friends or military strength. In the conflict that has continued since 1948, the Palestinian people have been robbed of their homes, livelihoods, educational and other opportunities, and have been suffering the worst atrocities in their own homeland on a daily basis. Any serious attempt at peace in the region must recognize that, number one, this conflict is highly imbalanced, and number two, that Palestinians are the victims of occupation, apartheid, and genocide. Before we go any further, I would like you to please join me in reading a statement. We are all going to read a statement of intent and to promise ourselves that we will direct our actions to fulfill this intent and not just say it. You're welcome to speak with me or repeat after me so it stays in our minds. On this International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, November 29th, we stand with the Palestinian people in their pursuit of freedom and rights guaranteed to them under international law. We condemn Israel for the occupation of Palestinian lands and its violent acts against Palestinians. We mourn all lives lost and we empathize with all who have suffered, Palestinian and Israeli, and any others who are caught in the conflict. We do not support any anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish bigotry inside the region or outside. This includes violence, but also hate speech, which often leads to violence. We will work towards peace that can only come with justice and dignity for all. We therefore will work for justice and dignity to ensure peace. Thank you for reading the statement of intent with me. I now invite Sami Dosani to speak.
Thank you, Shireen, and thank you for that good statement of intent, that great statement of intent, and the overview of what we're going to do today. So let me ask people, you can put in the chat box here, or you can put in the Q&A session. If you'd like, you could even raise your hand and I will unmute you. What's going on? What's the main problem? What's really going on here? And I put some options. So there's one option that this is religious claims, competing religious claims from Jewish people, Muslim people, and Christian people, right? Is that a problem that's underlying this? Is it the Holocaust? Is it the fact that there were crimes committed against the Jewish community and therefore they have settled here? Is it the Jews and Muslims simply cannot live together at all? Is it the question of control of religious places? Is it just a big misunderstanding? Control of land and other resources, is that what's going on? Are there third-party interests at play? What do you think may be going on? I'll give a minute for people to put their answer in the chat. So just from what we've heard things like, well, the Jewish people have been there for 2,000 years, right? So something about history here. We've also heard that, look at what happened to people in the Holocaust. Shouldn't they have their homeland back? This kind of stuff. Anything else that you'd like to mention, Shireen, if others are not going to mention before we move on to the next part?
No, not really. There is definitely the influence of other countries also, like the United States and so on, that people refer to. But yeah, no, I don't have anything to add here. Thank you. But Shama Kilpadi says that Israeli Zionist intransigence about revisiting the agony of the Holocaust upon the people of Palestine, armed as the Zionists believe they are with biblical sanction.
Yeah,
it's a combination of the Holocaust and the religious claim. I think that is what she's saying.
Yeah.
Sami, there's more comments.
Gee, I see Nilina Sunil says, mostly it's the last two, I think. Religion might be a motivating factor, not the main thing. So I think these are interesting observations. So I think when we are talking about this, we have to recognize a few things. Number one, we have to recognize that there has been an occupation going back to 1947, as we can see with these charts. Most people will be familiar with this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But the point being that in violation of international law at various points in time, in 1967 and in 1947 especially, the state of Israel has captured land. There has also been an attempt to use what we call an apartheid wall, so to use a wall that was supposed to be about security, and if it was about security, then it would have been built on the internationally recognized borders of Israel, but it wasn't built along those borders. So we call it either a land grab wall or an apartheid wall, as it was trying to extend the territory of Israel as much as possible into Gaza and into the West Bank, quite successfully, it must be said. Apartheid also in this context, so I'm speaking to you from South Africa, Shireen and I are based in South Africa. We have a lot of friends and comrades who were a big part of the anti-apartheid struggle here. And what we can say is that the biggest similarity is this idea of a police force that is checking things. First of all, the police force checks your documents, checks your papers, harasses you, arbitrarily arrests you, arrests children, and so on. That is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that you have people who are not with the police force who are with Israel, who are Israeli settlers in this particular case, who are actively breaking the law and who are not being held accountable. Just in the last few weeks, there's been a couple of murders, there's been terrible stories, there've been, all kinds of things going on with settlers trying to expand their base and take over new houses. Again, completely illegally, but you'll never find that Israel arrests the settlers. In fact, quite the opposite. If someone protests that, why are you burning my house? Why are you burning my olive trees? The Israeli state sides with them. Of course, there's also apartheid within Israel. And we can talk about even some form of anti-Jewish apartheid, because the Jews who are not from Europe, the Jews who are from Africa or Syria or other places, so-called Sephardi Jews, they also do not, sort of live as second-class citizens within Israel. They don't enjoy as much political power. And of course, Arab Israelis are really face the brunt of kind of a second-class citizenship within Israel. So the second point is really that there's this apartheid. The third point is that there is an ongoing genocide. And I think this last few months have been very clear, because in order for something to be called a genocide as opposed to murder, there has to be an active intent to destroy a people. And what we see in the last few months, for those who follow the Hebrew press in particular, is that the statements from the leaders, as high as the prime minister, but also the foreign minister, the secretary of state, and so on, there has been calls for. There's been genocidal calls. There's been all kinds of genocidal rhetoric. And then that has been implemented in Gaza and elsewhere. Genocide doesn't only mean killing with rockets and bombs and all these kind of things. Genocide can also be denial of access to food and water and even power, as we saw in the case of Al-Shifa Hospital. Children dying because the incubators could not run. We didn't have enough. They didn't have enough diesel and gas to run the hospital, right? So, and one way in which this genocide happens is access to water. We know this is a long history. The article on the right is about 20 years old, that Israel has been, on the one hand, trying to control water resources in the West Bank, and on the other hand has, so you cannot just dig your own wells. That is no longer allowed. But they also are drilling. They drill sort of parallel. So they start drilling within the territory of Israel, but it'll end up in aquifers in the West Bank, and they're taking the water and then they're reselling back to citizens of the West Bank. So it's an extremely dangerous and terrible situation. So from the perspective of peace praxis, so praxis is the combination of practice and theory, right? So we can say there's an absence of justice. Those four things. So we have this settler element, we have land grabbing, right? We have apartheid, we have a genocide, and we have this imbalance between the two peoples. We can say what Frederick Douglass said in the United States context back in 1859, that there can be no virtue without freedom and no peace without justice, right? So in the context of injustice, there will always be violence. And of course, this is something that Gandhi and Dr. King and many others understood very well. So I think we can just highlight that. It's also the case that Israel has friends in high places who have been delaying the process of international law proceeding. So the United States has blocked UN resolutions. This was the first time, and I'd love to hear from Dr. Tripathi or others about this. Is one of the first times that India actually abstained. India did not vote with the majority of the world, nor did it vote with the United States. India abstained on this particular UN resolution. But in general, the United States has made every international diplomatic solution untenable. And at the same time, Israel has violated their own agreements many, many times, even according to their own ministers. So I've given just one example of where Israel was in violation. This is an example from, I believe, 2008, where Oslo, which is what Israel claims that the Palestinians are in violation of, but Israel itself is also in violation of the Oslo Accords. So with that, I will hand it back to Shirin to look at the next point.
Thank you, Samir. I will be looking at another point that we as peace educators need to pay a lot of attention to. Anyone who is working on peace must pay attention to this, is propaganda. we all know how difficult it is, how challenging it is to fight lies that are propagated through a well-funded machinery of media, including social media these days. We also are well aware of the fear factor. Fear is whipped up through propaganda, and then it is very easy to get people to support fascist politics, whether it was against the Jews in Germany or it is against Arabs in Israel today. We have done really extensive work on propaganda. If you'd like to go to our channel and view those programs, you're welcome to do that. They're all free. Anybody can go there and watch them. In fact, one in Hindi is coming up on 10th of December by Dr. Abhay Shukla, who is going to be our resource person. But today I want to talk to you about some very specific issues relating to Israeli propaganda. Of course, the usual characteristics of propaganda apply to Israeli propaganda too. But I want to talk of some specifically Israeli propaganda characteristics. The first is that compared to most fascist regimes in history, this state, the Israeli state, invests a lot in international propaganda. So we hear a lot about Israel's very existence under threat, defense of Zionism as a pretext for defending Jews, when we know that Zionism does not represent Jews or Judaism, and that many Jews are against the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Equating any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, and so on. But as people who genuinely want peace, we must remember that Israel and its friends invest a lot in international propaganda, which means it is not just the population of Israel that is manipulated. There is a huge effort to present Israel as a victim internationally, thereby, and it is horrible to see this, using the tragedy of the Holocaust to justify what is being done to Palestine, when the Palestinians had absolutely nothing to do with what happened to Jews in Europe. So that is one feature that we must really remember, that it is not just the internal public of Israel that the propaganda is directed at, but international, because without international support, actually Israeli state cannot exist the way it is existing right now. Next slide, please. The second specific of the Israeli propaganda is, and unfortunately, I must blame all of us in this, because a lot of progressive people like us have fallen for it. We assume that the Palestinian struggle is all about throwing stones and hitting some rockets. We have to know that most of the Palestinian struggle has been non-violent. Look, we have to understand that the basic fact that it is human instinct to preserve life, especially when it comes to your own life and the life of those you love. The Palestinians are not stupid to start attacking people who they are living in close proximity with and who are much, much more powerful than them militarily. So the most effective form of resistance for a party that is weak would be dialogue, diplomacy, and non-violent resistance. These are the exact things that Palestinians have done and are still doing, constantly trying to present the case at the United Nations. That is part of their struggle. We must remind ourselves that that's diplomacy, that's presenting your case, that's trying to negotiate. Of course, Israel doesn't give a damn about that institution of international diplomacy. Palestinians have also tried again and again to protest and fight with peaceful means. Do you know how many peaceful attempts have been made by the Palestinians to cross the walls and the wires that keep them contained in the concentration camps? Or to ask for basic rights to water, food, and sanitation, or to meet their loved ones? You know that if you are in Gaza, you cannot go to the West Bank and vice versa, unless Israeli police and the military lets you. So I will talk a little bit more about nonviolent resistance of the Palestinians, but right now, here is a picture of a Palestinian area. There are women, this is in 1988, protesting in front of the IDF soldiers. IDF, I'm sure everyone knows, is the Israeli Defense Forces. And they are protesting because the soldiers had arrested and broken the bones of the youth that were caught by the IDF. The photo on the right is of Rachel Corey, who was 23 years old. I'm giving you two pictures because one is by the Palestinian people fighting their battle in peaceful manner. And the picture on the right is an international supporter of their cause. And she was Rachel Corrie, 23-year-old American, who stood in front of an Israeli bulldozer that was destroying homes in Rafah in 2003. And she was killed. And she was actually one of our interns in one of the organizations we worked for in Washington, D.C. and in other parts of the US. Before I go any further, I would really like to invite Dr. V.K. Tripathi at this time. As you know, he is a really tireless soldier of peace. And he knows a lot about the subject of peaceful resistance, non-violent resistance, or satyagraha, as we call it in India. And over the years, he has taught us so much at Peace Vigil. I am really grateful he's in the audience. Dr. Tripathi, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Serene. The presentation that I have heard, your presentation and Samir's presentation, has been very revealing. My understanding of this problem is very little as compared to what you've really already explained. But I would like to add a few things here. I was living in America for 6 years, from 1976 through 1982. And in 1982, when I saw on television screens the Israeli attack on Lebanon, specifically on Palestinian camps that killed 20,000 Palestinians, I felt very sad. And the problem, when I wanted to discuss with professors and scientists at the University of Maryland, they were hesitant to talk because America was supporting Israel, and Israel had a lot of influence over there. Israel means the people who were supporting Israel, they had a lot of influence in the education system in America. So that was a very disgusting thing for me, because otherwise in American universities, there is a lot of liberalism. People feel pained when there is injustice anywhere. And probably faculty and students in 1982 at different university campuses may also be feeling sad about it. But because of the state policy, they were unable to express it explicitly. And so that was one thing. Few years later, I learned from 1987 through 1993, for 6 years, Mubarak Awad, a Palestinian Christian living in America, he went back to whose father was killed in 1948 at a young age when he was very young. And Mubarak Awad went to Palestine, and he tried to convince the people that you have fundamental right to live as free citizens. You are living in occupied territories, Gaza and West Bank. Now, there are 3 options before you. Either you remain passive, or you resist it through violent means, and third is through non-violence. Well, those who want to do it through violence may recognize that your armaments and your army strength or military strength is nothing as compared to what the opponents have. And I think preserving your human dignity and human sensitivity, distinguishing between the ruler and the people. So rather than feeling anguish or agitated against the Israeli people, you should direct your anger against the regime which is perpetrating injustices on people of Palestine. And he was able to convince those people. And then I think after he was deported by Israel, but I think he had created a base, and that struggle continued on the basis of grassroots leadership. And like the ladies you are seeing on the screen over here, and many more, about 1,200 or 1,300 people, these non-violent peace activists, died. They were killed by the armed forces. And in the period of 6-7 years, about 150 Israelis were also killed, roughly 20-30 per year, not by the non-violent protesters. After all, because when large-scale killings take place, some retaliation takes place from some quarters. So some groups, just like in India, when Gandhi was leading the non-violent freedom struggle, there were some attempts by armed rebellion groups. And so some British were, not rather British, rather in India, some British were killed, but largely some Indian supporters of British were killed. So I think, but that should not just look at the movement. It was as non-violent as Gandhian movement in India. And that reflects the character and mental makeup of Palestinian people who suffered immensely. Indian people were not thrown out of Indian lands when British ruled over India. We were slave of British, but we were living in our homes. We were living in this land. The Palestinian people have been denied their own homes. They have no government. They have no agency to protect them, no agency to take care of their education, their jobs, and so on. And look at the adversary. Adversary is equipped with atom bomb. They are selling arms to countries like India. Look at their military might. It's a ratio of 1 to 100,000. So you are facing an adversary who is 100,000 times more powerful than you, resource-wise, armaments-wise, propaganda-wise, as Shireen just pointed out. And that context, if you can conduct a non-violent rebellion for 6-7 years, I think it's a great credit. This is the best form of non-violent resistance by Palestinian people, and this reflects their great internal spiritual strength. I think they are next to none on the earth at the moment. No Buddhist, no Hindu, no Muslim, no Christian, no Jew community has demonstrated this sort of internal strength, inner strength of the soul. I think, so this is one thing that I wanted to point out. Second thing I wanted to mention was, in the current phase of the conflict, when it's single-handed, you have rightly pointed out, sort of a genocide. But we don't mix with the words. The real problem is the people who are abandoned by the world community. All powerful nations are supporting, making a statement that Israel has the right to defend itself. Certainly, it's fine. But is this the defense or is it an offense? If you have 0.1% chance of retaliation, you are finishing off that possibility in its infancy. What is that? You are targeting, you are depriving 22 million people trapped in Gaza under siege, cutting off their water, their food, their medicine, and continuously bombarding them. There is a ceasefire for a few days, but that is very small period. 47 days these people have suffered. And I think I'm still convinced that despite this devastation, despite 15,000 deaths, including 5,000 children massacred, I think still Palestinian people must be having sensitivity. They are not driven by hate. They are driven by humanism within themselves. I have great respect for those people. I do not know what can I do, but I certainly wish that people from India should put a word with the government of India that our genuine concern humanism demands that we should stop purchasing arms from a country which is oppressive on helpless, the people made countryless, defenseless, governmentless. They must stop this. This is till, well, I'm not against Israeli people, but certainly the policies of the regime and their army are inhuman. And well, I really do not see any other way out in such hard conditions. What kind of non-violent rebellion can take shape? Let us see what can happen. And nothing is clear to me at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tripathi. I would, at this point, just bring us to a few points that I think are very important from Dr. Tripathi's speech. One is that despite so many hardships, the struggle has been mostly non-violent. But as Dr. Tripathi says, how long will this continue? We don't know. If you're pushed to the extreme, I think it's very hard to not hit back. And of course, it's within the rights of the Palestinians to defend themselves against occupation. But also, it's very important that, when we say Israeli state and Israeli people, it's not the same as Hindutva and India. You see, Israel is actually formed on a lie. Israel was actually formed on injustice. The very inception of Israel is unjust. And the people were moved from other parts of the world to Israel. So how much is it like that, this is Israeli state and these are the Israeli people, or is it a lot of intertwining here? Because, we have to understand that when we are criticizing Israel, the vast majority of Israelis are benefiting from the apartheid and the occupation of the Palestinian people. So I think it's a little bit different than saying, not everyone supports Hindutva. So, we can't criticize India for what it's doing to Muslims. We have to criticize the BJP government. I think in the case of Israel, it's a little more difficult. And I think Samir can talk about this a little bit more.
We'll get there when we talk about the South African parallels as well. Yes.
So let's move forward now. I would like to go back to the non-violent slide, please. So I was telling you about the non-violent resistance and the right to resist, and really Dr. Tripathi actually also gave specific names of people, and he has done research on this. So thank you so much, Dr. Tripathi. The next slide, please. I want to give a few specifics about the nonviolent resistance of the Palestinian people. It really is not given any due in any space in the media. We don't hear about it, and we ourselves, the progressive people, also get into this trap of thinking that it's only the throwing of the stones and the rockets that is resistance. No. So let's go to the first point, which is demonstrations. And of course, you know this, but I think we forget it. Is that Palestinian people have always demonstrated against the injustice meted out to them. I mean, there are demonstrations every single day for years, for decades now, whether they're small or they're big, and they use theater, they use song, they use dance, they use puppetry, they have face masks, they do all this. That is a form of protest, an everyday protest. The next is non-cooperation. I'll give you an example. Okay, there is large-scale refusal to work in Israeli settlements. That is the reason why just now this whole Hamas thing that happened, there were Thai people who were caught in that. They were just released. Why were Thais there? Why are Indians wanting to go there? Because of the non-cooperation movement of the Palestinians. They are refusing to work in Israeli settlements. They are refusing to work in Israeli factories. Earlier, they even used to have strikes in the Israeli factories. Now, this is the definition of non-cooperation. This is the definition of non-violent struggle. Do you know that people are refusing to fill out any forms, to give any information, to cooperate with the authorities in any way? They are refusing to carry or produce identity cards, which is exactly the same that happened in apartheid South Africa. They are refusing to sign or fill out any forms or documents that are printed or written in Hebrew, not because they hate Hebrew, but because it is the language of the oppressor, of the colonizer. We have to remember that this comes at a very great personal cost. Non-cooperation and civil disobedience are not the tools of the coward. Palestinians have employed these tools of protest, and they have been jailed and beaten up brutally for these acts. And this is not something new. They have done it for all these almost 8 decades. And just like South African non-white population did not show identity cards, refused to write or speak in Afrikaans, which was the language of the ruling class, they are doing the same. Same as Gandhi and his comrades who burnt their identity cards. So the Palestinians have always done these brave acts of non-violent resistance, and they continue to do so. Having said that, I do not want to at any point not stress that they have the right to resist. I keep on repeating this, and that's why I've put it in the same line as non-violent resistance. They have the right to fight against the tyranny they are being subjected to. Yes, most of the times it's non-violent, but when you leave people no choice, they will turn to armed struggle. I, as a peace educator, who's trained as a peace educator, I'm telling you that an armed struggle is inevitable if you push people to the extreme. So while you will not find a right to resist in the Human Rights Charter, by the way, you won't find it, having worked with the Amnesty and all, I can tell you that it's not there. There's nothing that says right to resist in the Charter of Human Rights. But you see, there's so many rights in the Charter that are not possible for Palestinians to have because of the situation Israel is forcing on them. So indirectly, they have the right to resist. How they do it is totally up to them. Well, let me tell you one thing, which is technical, is based on the Charter, the 1970 United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2625 explicitly endorsed a right to resist subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation. So based on this, I would say, and many scholars would say, that the right to resist exists in the international law, because you need self-determination. They don't have the right to do that, so they have the right to resist. Okay, moving on, the next point I want to tell you about the resistance, it's very interesting, it's noise. And this needs a little bit of more explanation. I will give you a very specific example. Sorry, I can't go into a lot of detail, but I'll give you one specific example. When people are really trapped, they find creative means to protest, like Indians did during emergency. Although, it was nothing compared to what people are going through now in Gaza and even in the West Bank. So one of the ways that Palestinians have protested is through sounds. They make sounds with their mouths, like in Arab culture people do, but also use whistles and car horns, pom, 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 even though there are not that many vehicles, but they use whatever they have. And I'll give you a specific example of the closure of the Birzeit University. It was in the West Bank. It used to be a girls' school and then was turned into university. As you know, there are not that many universities for Palestinians anyway. Well, it is near Ramallah, and it was closed down for 4 years. Continuously, the Palestinians protested against it. They would do this all the time, make noise. And the Israeli army was so irritated, they actually attacked the protesters, even though they were only making noise, but they attacked them as they would if they were throwing stones. Next thing is obstruction of roads. So this lady you're seeing, she's sitting there. It's a sit-in, like Gandhian sit-in. You just sit in, you don't move. You don't let the tanks pass. You don't let cars, military or administrative cars of the Israelis pass. You know, that is a very, very strong civil disobedience move that they made. And that is why Rachel Corrie was killed. She stood in front of this bulldozer and she was stopping the bulldozer, and the bulldozer basically killed her, knowingly that she was standing there. A woman was standing there, a 23-year-old young woman. So now I would like to go to another very important way of protest, which is funeral, janaza, जिसको उर्दू में हम बोलते हैं. So funerals are a very obviously painful thing for a community that is going through so much, but you turn that into protest. You put your flag there, you know, you mourn, you let the whole world know that you're together in this. So of course, many images come to mind, but the most, I think, striking image that comes to my mind in recent years is that of Shireen Abu Akleh's funeral. Samir, I think there is a clip. Can we play that?
The large numbers that turned out for her funeral were testimony to how loved she was. It's rare for a journalist to have this kind of an impact. Known as the voice of Palestine, even in death, Shireen continued to tell the story of the Palestinian people. Israeli forces beat mourners at her funeral procession, almost causing Shireen's coffin to fall to the ground. These images prompted international condemnation from the United States to France and the Vatican. It appears the Israelis didn't want her coffin to be carried by the people, or for the Palestinian flag to be flown. Shireen's family has campaigned tirelessly for justice, approaching the White House, the International Criminal Court, the European Parliament, the Vatican, and the United Nations General Assembly. The Americans and the Israelis said it was most likely Shireen was killed by an Israeli soldier, but that it was an accident and no further action would be taken. However, several independent investigations found that the shot was fired by a sniper and that Shireen was deliberately targeted.
I mean, do you see what they did, what the Palestinians did? Despite so much force being put against them, I mean, this is a funeral. And yet the Israeli military and police beat them up. The coffin almost fell down. But they continued. No one hit back. No one hit back, because they knew in that moment that this is a very, it's a moment where we are grieving. We are not going to hit back. We are honoring this woman, this journalist. And I don't know if you know this. I mean, maybe you knew it already, but definitely after seeing this video, you know that Shireen was a Christian Palestinian. There are also, by the way, Palestinian Jews that we don't hear of. But one thing that, you know, often is said is Israel doesn't care. Yes, Israel doesn't care to an extent, but international reputation does matter. So this particular case of Shireen was really highlighted throughout the media. In fact, that is one of the reasons why journalists, even from the BBC, which is generally not pro-Palestinian, you know, their journalists have written a letter saying that, look, you know, this is too much. This is, you know, very anti-Palestinian rhetoric we are playing every day on media. And the death of Shireen Abu Akleh is one of the reasons why the whole media community at least is paying more attention to the Palestinian cause. So it does matter. What comes on screen, what you hear, what you capture, it does matter. And we shouldn't stop doing it. We should record anything that we see is against international law and human rights. Now, next quickly is graffiti. It has landed many Palestinians into jail. In fact, there is graffiti even on the wall that Israel has made. Unfortunately, a lot of the pictures that we see are coming from Israel and not from Palestine. But there is amazing graffiti all around the Palestinian areas. And as I said, it is not the work of cowards. They do get beaten up for it. They get arrested for it. Samir, I would definitely like to go a bit in detail on BDS, but you are the expert on it. So I'm going to please request you to do that, which is also a non-violent form of protest. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. So the question, so the BDS tactic is one that was employed against South African apartheid. Again, I'm speaking to you here from South Africa. My first political action as a child, I think at the age of 8 or 9, was to be part of this BDS movement against, at that time, Coca-Cola was a target company. I can't remember, was it Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, that we were trying to, put enough pressure on them that they would pull out of South Africa, right? So the point is that, and I think you alluded to this earlier, in the case of white South Africa, in the case of Jewish Israelis, you're never really going to change the opinion. Why? Because people, first of all, because of the exposure to propaganda, but B, because people are personally gaining from what's going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So in other words, you can read all these stories from 1948 or from 1967 or even from today. People are actually moving into houses that have, dinner on the table. Some other family was going to eat, and now a Jewish family has taken over. Those people have been evicted in the middle of their meal, whatever it may have been, right? So in that kind of a situation, you're so personally invested. There's an Upton Sinclair saying, a man will never vote against what his wallet says, right? People will not vote against, people will not hold opinions that are against their own interests. So when you are the beneficiary of stealing, how can you be against stealing as a policy, right? It's not going to happen. So in that context, what do? You can isolate the country through a campaign of boycott, divest, and sanctions. That's BDS, right? What are the three arms? There's boycott, which also includes an academic boycott. So I happen to be associated with a couple of universities here in South Africa. So if we get invited to Israel, certainly we are not going. But furthermore, if we are even invited to a conference in which other Israelis are invited, we will ask what's going on. Is this university, say some third-party university, are you not part of the academic boycott? And if you are part of the academic boycott, is there a letter from the Palestinian movements saying that it's okay to invite this person because for whatever reason, maybe this person is part of the boycott campaign, him or herself, right? So there are Israeli supporters, but we would need written permission from Palestinian organizations before we do anything that may be violating the academic boycott. That's boycott. And of course, we try to get Israeli products removed from, for example, grocery stores here in South Africa. Just this week, we've been able to have pearl barley removed. It was pearl barley, I believe, or was it pearl couscous? I don't remember.
Couscous, pearl.
It was a couscous. Okay, so it was the only Israeli product in the South African grocery stores here. The campaigns put enough pressure on the South African grocery stores that is no longer available here. It's been removed. Okay, so that is the boycott part of it. Divest would be if you have companies that are investing in Israel. How do we get those companies to divest? And here it becomes about how do you pressure. Sometimes it's not companies that have already invested in Israel. Sometimes it is companies who have the power to. So for example, can we get our trade unions? Can we get our pension funds? Can we get our, whatever it may be, whatever financial institutions we are part of, can we get them to sign a statement saying that they will not invest in any Israeli-owned asset, something like that, right? That is the divest part of it. And sanctions, of course, is, how do we put pressure? How do we actually put pressure on Israel from a financial point of view through sanctions to sort of say that we're not going to, to eventually get them to move? Because looking at South Africa, these campaigns actually played a very strong role. So what was happening, it's similar to Israel in the sense that their main backer was the US. Both in the case of South Africa and Israel, the main backer is the US. and US support was kind of beginning to waver a little bit. And that was enough, and there was nowhere else they could go because the rest of the world was part of this boycott, divest, sanctions movement. So I don't think we're that strong as yet in the case of Israel. I don't think the BDS movement is global in the way that the anti-apartheid movement was global. But that's our goal. We have to be doing that wherever we can do it. Yeah, sorry, this is moving on to the next point. Sorry. Should I move on to the next point, Shiri, or should I give it back to you?
Yeah, I think you should, Samir.
So the things that have come up. So in order for peace to be built, we actually need communication between communities. And unfortunately, the communities are more or less split. It's been very difficult. In fact, there was the unfortunate case of someone who may have been killed by Hamas or may have been killed by Israeli friendly fire in a kibbutz, a Canadian Jewish peace activist. She was actually trying to bring people together. So there's propaganda, there's the inability to bring people together. There's also the fact that people...
her name was Vivian Silver.
Thank you so much, Vivian Silver. There's also the fact that people are gaining from this system, as has been mentioned. So if you're living in a stolen house, you can't really be against theft, right? And then there's sort of the larger questions about colonial capitalism and how it's basically stealing resources. So a few years ago, natural gas was found off the coast of Gaza. When that was found, around 1999, many of us thought even at that time that it's going to cause problems because now it becomes much more difficult for Israel, much less likely that Israel will ever give up claims to the Gaza Strip because that's where you would bring in the offshore gas. And in fact, that's what they're currently doing, right? There's also just what we can describe as vandalism, what is often described as vandalism in the newspapers, but it's actually a deliberate attempt to undermine the economic base of the Palestinians. So when settlers are destroying olive trees and lemon trees and farms, this is vandalism, but it's much more than that. The olives are, the people that they're going after in the West Bank have been olive farmers for 1,000 years or more. So, it really is a fundamental attack on the way of life when you're destroying. And olives are not something that you can just plant a tree and get the fruit tomorrow. It takes decades for olives to be able to give mature fruits that can be turned into oil. So, I don't want to give a lecture on agriculture, but these are some of the problems that we're dealing with, some of the obstacles. So there's just the general nature of the propaganda machine where people are dehumanized. There's the inability to humanize people when you're not sitting down at the same table. There is the fact that people are actually gaining. So if I see you as a human now, does it mean I have to give my house back? Right? They will not like that. And there are these larger forces which are moving towards dehumanization. And as we all know, dehumanization is the enemy of peace.
So Samir, before we go to the next thing, I just want to add a few points to what you have already said. You see, in peace practices, anyone who has, worked as a peace educator or a peace worker will tell you that the premise, the assumption that we have in any kind of effort towards peace is that we have to consider our adversary as human, right? I mean, like if I am at war with somebody and I want that somebody to understand my pain, I have to first accept that that person is human enough to understand my suffering. That is missing in this whole conflict because of propaganda. So it's not just that there is fear and there's anger and all that, but the propaganda has been so strong that the other side cannot feel anything. Even if you show them a picture of 100 kids killed, it doesn't have any impact. Why? Because there's been so much brainwashing. So you must have seen in recent days, no matter what you say, the other side will always come up with the argument, but what about Hamas? Or Hamas are terrorists. And you can't get the argument any further. So that for us as peace educators is a big challenge, is that the very premise of nonviolent struggle, the very premise of peaceful resistance is being challenged here. You know, the fact that the other person is human enough to understand your suffering, that is missing. So that's very important. And the second thing, what Sami said about the big gainers here, you know, so the small gainers are the people who got the free house and the free swimming pool and the free field. And at an individual level, it's a big thing, but at a more societal, bigger level, the really big profiteers from all this are the armament industry, you know, are the big corporates, and they're not necessarily Israeli. They're living in the West. They're controlling things from the West. Okay, so now I think I want to touch on another issue which is related to what I said, but you know, we have to understand that our challenges are quite difficult on an international scene. So we are outsiders. We are not Palestinians. We are not Israelis. We're trying to make a difference from outside. But whenever we do say anything or do anything, we are labeled as anti-Semitic. And of course, added to that is the Islamophobia, which is, as we know, a global problem right now. So I'd like to know from you, the people who are attending this webinar, is what has your experience been when you have tried to stand on the side of justice, when you have tried to defend Palestinians, when you have tried to put their case forward, that how much injustice is being done to them? What are the kind of things that are thrown back at you? In my opinion, it is labeling any criticism as anti-Semitic and the Islamophobia. I'd like to know from you, please.
Shireen, your presentation on nonviolence has been immensely truthful and forceful. It really helped me understand nonviolence deeper. I'm so pleased. You narrated everything factually and the great depth. Number two, my experience about when I was distributing, because I wrote a letter to Prime Minister Modi about this conflict, that he should intervene. And but then I did not receive any reply. So I made 4,000 copies and I was distributing. One day I went to Mewat in Haryana. I gave this letter to about 150 people. I encountered two shopkeepers, Hindu shopkeepers, and they say that, you know, Hamas is a terrorist organization. So terrorism has to be fought. And then I had to tell them that what Hamas has done is an act of violence. Certainly you are right about it. But Hamas is not Palestinian people, number one. And number two, the youth who did it, they died themselves. So it was not for money or for any gain. Because what has been happening to them and their relatives and their friends and their family members for in recent past and in 7 decades, it's a reaction of that. So if you consider Israeli invasion as a reaction of what Hamas did to Israeli people, then don't you see that this is much more monstrous retaliation or offensive? So if you treat one as offensive, please try to understand the monstrous offensive launched by the Israel on Palestinian people. And the reason was that Prime Minister Modi on 7th October, when Hamas attacked Israel, then he made a statement strongly supporting Israel. 2 days later, ministry says that we stand by the Palestinian rights for coexistence. Now, the second statement was just a verbal statement. The first one was a message to the RSS cadre throughout the country. And that message was very clear, and that went to the hearts of RSS cadre in the country. So we are confronting a problem, not only in Gaza, in Indian homeland as well. That the cadre which has been ruling the country for 10 years and which will be ruling the Indian oceans for 33 decades. They got strengthened by this rather than condemning what is going on in Gaza. They are rejoicing it. They are enjoying it. That is a great punishment given to a terrorist people. I think this is the worst thing that is happening in India. I'm sorry to intervene.
No. Please don't say sorry, Dr. Tripathi. Your wisdom, and I don't know how many people are not aware of this. I think most people are, that this gentleman here goes from one point to another in cities, in villages, distributing flyers. Just now, he distributed thousands of flyers on Palestine. He talks individually to people. He is a real peace worker, somebody who works on the ground. So no, Dr. Tripathi, we really value your insight. Okay, what about Dr. Bhagat? I did notice that he's in the webinar. I wonder if he would like to speak something. Dr. Bhagat? Dr. Bhagat used to teach physics at the University of Maryland and has been a peace worker for many decades now.
Well,
Yes, Dr.
I think there is a fundamental problem here which needs to be addressed and understood. The fact of the matter is that for centuries, our Jewish friends were ill-treated in Europe. It came to a maximum when Hitler decided to destroy them completely. But the fact is that even in those days, several ships carrying Jews came to America and they were sent back. So people here, as a power structure, feels guilty. That guilt is what led the President of the United States to recognize Israel within 15 minutes of its independence. And that is the reason why the United States goes out of its way in order to support the people. That's part of it. The second thing is that we are fooling ourselves into thinking that there is democracy in many, many places. It is not. Yeah, and then there is, of course, invariably, I have learned, living here as well as in other places, that there is significant amount of suffering on the part of people whose color is wrong. That's part of it. So all the other things, unfortunately, have been set in people's minds. As you said before, one of the reasons why people don't care about whom they are hurting, because they don't think of them as equals. They don't think of them as actual, have the right to be existing at all. So this is something that is unfortunate. For instance, I also heard Dr. Abhay Shukla talking about democracy. And even then it struck me that democracy is something which is bandied around. It is propagandized all over the place. And the so-called democracies actually are hurting their own people all the time. Look at what is happening in the United States now. People are losing their right to vote. And it's happening again and again. And this is a country which was founded, at least on paper, as a democratic organization. But only men were created equal. Don't forget that. Women were not excluded. And if your color was wrong, you are still not fully recognized.
No,
So
you are
let
right.
us
Absolutely.
let us
Yes.
remember this,
Yes.
that this is a very deep problem.
Certainly, Dr. Bhagat. And
Until
you know, yes.
that is recognized, there
Yeah.
is no solution.
Yeah, we need to fight this on a lot of fronts. But Dr. Bhagat's point is very valid that, where we are seeking for support, those countries themselves don't have the kind of freedom that we think they do. I would like to talk about a very unpleasant experience I had recently with a cousin of mine who, after I sent him an invitation to attend this webinar, basically told to my face that I'm only doing this because I have a Muslim connection, forgetting that I also have a Hindu connection. but that was the logic of attacking me about my support for Palestine. And also the other thing which was very funny is the exact Hindutva logic is that in the past, like Hindutva ideologues say this, that look, we are all Hindus. The Muslims converted, but they're originally Hindus, and therefore everyone should go back to their original stuff. Which by the way, the Zionists don't say that. But my cousin used the same logic about what is happening in Palestine. And he said to me, well, they have the same prophets, from Abraham onwards. And therefore, what the Israeli state is doing is absolutely right, because after all, the Muslims also are Jews, which is not correct. And the Zionists don't say that. But his whole thing was that they have the right to do it because they are the original everyone in that area, which is what the Hindutva politics also says about India, that we are not doing anything wrong because after all, everyone was Hindu originally in their opinion. So that is what I wanted to share. Sami, do you want to share any personal interactions? Since
Not really. I mean, it's been really, I know, like a lot of people on this call, it's been very disheartening just to see the footage. I have friends in Israel. So I worked with an organization, Action Aid International, that had offices in the West Bank, that has an office in Bethlehem. Seeing my friends, what they were going through, not in Gaza, but in the West Bank even, the kind of fear that they were living with was traumatizing a little bit. But what was worse is that, this is not a Holocaust. This is not a genocide that is being hidden. This is a genocide that is coming to us live on Twitter and Facebook and Al Jazeera and, even CNN and so on. I saw an interview with a doctor, an American doctor who was working in a hospital in Gaza and managed to get out. And she used the words to Anderson Cooper, who's a CNN journalist, very mainstream. He said, the Palestinians who are there on the ground, they are not terrorists, they are heroes. And he asked, would you ever go back? Because she barely escaped with her life, yeah? He asked her, do you think you'd ever go back? She said, in a heartbeat, I would go back. They are the most brave, most courageous people I've ever seen. And the response was complete silence because the journalist had never considered that the victims would actually be the ones who get the bravery. It's always the oppressors who are turned into saints in places like CNN. So just to see that, and to see that human nature has, for many people, I mean, for people who've decided their side is to side with the powerful against the powerless, they just were not able to break themselves away with that. It was very heartbreaking for me. So, we'll talk a little bit about where the hope lies, and I did see some signs of hope. But for me, it was just, even at the time of Germany, at the time of the Holocaust, many people could claim, and maybe they were right, they just didn't know what was going on. They didn't know how many people were being killed. They didn't know there was a Holocaust going against Jews. No one has that excuse today. And yet there are still people who are justified.
Before we move on to Hindutva and Zionism and also the hopes and the tasks for us, perhaps it is a good time right now to play Tushar Gandhiji's message. I think it will give us all strength and it will give us his perspective as well. Tushar Gandhi, a very warm welcome to Peace Vigil.
Thank you very much, Shireen. It's always a pleasure to speak to you and to the Peace Vigil initiative. And thank you for inviting me to speak on the International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, and in particular with the rights of the Palestinian people to liberty and their homeland. Unfortunately, Shireen, I wasn't able to be present for the actual seminar, which I would have loved to be. So here's my message for your seminar, and my best wishes initially to Peace Vigil for success in all their endeavors, and in particular the ongoing endeavor for what Bapu referred to as the battle of right against might, because that battle continues, unfortunately, and we've always seen that right is often subjugated by a brutal exhibition of might. And so wherever there is a solidarity with people who are fighting for their rights, we must all stand up and raise our voices. जहाँ सत्य के खिलाफ और अधिकार के खिलाफ ताकत सामने होती है और ताकत के जोर पर अधिकार और सत्य को कुचला जाता है, वहां हमने अपने आवाज को बुलंद करके सत्य की उस लड़ाई के लिए खड़ा होना और अपना मत सत्य की तरफ, अधिकार की तरफ से बयां करना बहुत जरूरी हो जाता है। और इसीलिए ये बहुत जरूरी है कि चाहे हम फिलिस्तीन में हो या ना हो, चाहे हम फिलिस्तीन से कितने भी दूर क्यों ना हो, चाहे हम यहूदी या अरब ना हो, तो भी मानवता के रिश्ते से हमने सत्य के साथ खड़ा रहना चाहिए। और इस जंग में सत्य फिलिस्तीनी लोगों के अपने मातृभूमि की चाहत के साथ ही है, और वो उनका अधिकार है कि उनकी जो मातृभूमि उनसे छीन ली गई है, वो उन पे उनका भी उतना अधिकार हो। I have to say this, that in this battle of the Palestinians for their homeland, which has been very criminally denied to them because Christian Europe did not want Jews in their midst post the Second World War. And the fear of the Holocaust being repeated played on the minds of the European Jews, and they, in their need for security, they did an injustice with the people of Palestine and took over their homeland. It is very sad that every time we try to or claim to be redressing a wrong that was done in history, we end up doing a further injustice and propagate that cycle of wrong deeds being perpetuated. And that is what has happened in Palestine.
Thank you to Tusharji for that message. I'm trying to get Professor Shamsul Islam to on the video. While we're waiting for that, I know Rifat, you wanted to say something as well, please.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So my context in this, I actually am working, I have 3 Palestinian families in Gaza that I've been personally supporting and helping them get through this this horrific situation. It's still going. Just because there's a truce doesn't mean anything is, life is great. It's still going. And what I've learned from them is their extreme resilience and strength and faith. And it's their faith that's getting them through this. And they are truly the heroes, right? At the same time, when thinking about what is really going on here, there's a book that I recently read for my book club, and it's called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. And in this book, what she does is she compares the Nazi system to the Hindu-Vat system of caste to the American system. And what she has come, and her conclusion is that this country is run by a caste system, dominant caste. And so there's a chapter, there's a little excerpt in here that caught my eye. And basically it says, his personal experience and close connection to the scapegoated caste allowed him to see past the lies and stereotypes so readily embraced by susceptible members, the majority, sadly, of the dominant caste. Though Aryan himself, his openness to the humanity of the people who had been deemed beneath him gave him a stake in their well-being, their fates tied to his. He could see what his countrymen chose not to see. And so that exactly is the situation we're having now. Who wants to see the humanity and who does not want to see the humanity? And why do they not want to see the humanity? Because of the dominance, the ego, which is what we're seeing with the West and now with Israel. And what I've also observed is that many of my Muslim friends have been defriended by their Jewish friends. Okay, some have chosen to just defriend them by personal choice. The common argument is always, well, they went through the Jewish people always say they went through the Holocaust, and I understand, and that was a horrific genocide as well. However, the victim cannot be the perpetrator anymore, and the victim cannot play the victim card game anymore, and that's what's happening. And being of somebody who was also abused, I can honestly relate that you cannot be the victim anymore. There's a certain point in time where you have to release everything and see humanity for what it is and take it for the positive. And that's the whole issue with this situation between Palestine and Israel. And that's really sad. And so I wanted to read the last part of this book. We would like to believe that we would have taken the more difficult path of standing up against injustice in defense of the outcast. But unless people are willing to transcend their fears, endure discomfort and derision, suffer the scorn of loved ones and neighbors and coworkers and friends, fall into disfavor of perhaps everyone they know, face exclusion, and even banishment, it would be numerically impossible, humanely impossible for everyone to be that man. What would it take to be him in any era? What would it take to be him now? So what would it take for us to simply look at humanity as this is another person, another creation? He is my brother. I need to help him.
Fantastic.
So that's what I have to say.
Thanks for that, Rifat. I want to take it to Shirin to give us some hope and to sort of close this up. But before I do, I just wanted to share one quick thing, which is this letter from Einstein. So it's just important to remember who Albert Einstein was. Albert Einstein was a Jew who was persecuted in Europe, sought refuge in the United States, had family members, in the Holocaust. Like you can't accuse him of being anti-Semitic, right? He's a Jewish person, right? And what he says is, the people who are building the state of Israel are terrorist organizations built up from our own ranks, okay? So, and there's a longer letter that I won't have time to share where he calls them fascists, basically. So I think it's important to understand, it's not the people who were many of the people who were directly affected by the Holocaust recognize this as not, and many people who were very deeply religious Jews, but not Zionists, non-Zionist Orthodox and Hasids, especially Hasidic Jews, do not support Israel even to this day. So I think it's very important to mention these. I think there's a danger. The danger really happens, and Einstein is the one who pointed this out. If the state of Israel becomes an oppressive force in West Asia, which it is, and he predicted that it would become, then you have the danger of anti-Semitism reemerging because all Jews will be blamed for the crimes of the state of Israel. And in fact, that's the danger we see today. With that, can I ask you to Shireen to give us some hope, and we'll end it there as we've gone over time already.
Absolutely. That is my job as a peace educator, always to end on a hopeful note. What I want to do is actually talk of two things. One is hopes and tasks, but also I would definitely like to touch upon Zionism and Hindutva, because especially in the South Asian context, and most of our work is in the South Asian diaspora. So I would definitely like to touch upon that. The first thing I want to ask you to look at is on the top, it says hopes and tasks. Why am I saying that? Is because the tasks are actually hidden in the hopes we have. And I'll explain that better. So tasks are not only in the challenges that we have discussed throughout the webinar, but they're also in the hopes we have. The tasks actually come out of that. And I also want you to focus your attention on this picture of the peace dove. And in the back, it says, "Welcome to Palestine, welcome to Bethlehem." So it's not like the dove of peace is not present. It is there. We have the hope of peace. But look carefully, that dove is wearing body armor to protect itself, because it is in a very dangerous situation right now. We have talked about how desensitization has happened through propaganda. We have talked about how Samir said physically people have been segregated. So there's no chance of them meeting and seeing that the other person is also human. We have also seen how international actors are coming into this and making the situation worse. We have talked about the profit mongering lobby that is there, whether it's arms or, selling of water back to Palestine. It's the Palestinian water that the Israelis are now selling back to Palestinians. I mean, so all that. So what I'm trying to say here is that, look, the chance of peace is there. We are outsiders. Obviously, we can't do much, but we can still do things. And those things come out of our hopes. So number one is the outpouring of international support. Yeah. So I want to show you this outpouring of support. This is Washington, D.C. So we've all been talking about the U.S. and the U.S. policy, but just like we want to see us as separate from the states that rule us, the governments that rule us, we must remember that the U.S. is also home to millions of people who stand with justice in their own country, but also for outside. So look at the number of people in the capital of the United States of America. This is just from November 4th. Next, please. This is London, October 28th. There's another picture. Could you click on that, please? The next. Yes. Look at just the bridge. It's full of people. So unless, it's very important that we don't forget that there is this support out there. And I'm not talking right now of Muslim countries. I'm talking of Western countries that are considered to be secular and democratic and so on. They are coming out in big numbers. Next, please. This is Rome. So Italian public is out. Next. This is Rio de Janeiro. Next. Baghdad. And I'm specifically showing you Baghdad because this is another place where people have seen the suffering in recent years. Colonial suffering, what happens, somebody comes and bombards your country, basically. Next, please. This is very hopeful. Let us spend a little extra time on this. Is that the First Nations, or what we used to earlier call the Native Americans, of US and Canada, standing up for Palestine. And I think that is a very hopeful thing. It's people being able to identify with the Palestinian cause when they look at their own history. And as we know, the history of the First peoples of what we now call United States and Canada, is a very traumatizing history, what was done to them. But they are standing with the Palestinians today. Next, please. South Africa, where we are. And why is it that South Africa, I'm singling out South Africa here? It's because from a moral standpoint, South Africa's support to Palestine is extremely important because it's the most recent case of apartheid in our living memory, where an apartheid state, a brutal apartheid state, was removed. People of South Africa, Southern Africa, I should say, not just South Africa, they were able to fight against it and remove it. And look at the numbers that are there. This is Cape Town. You see the mountain in the back, that's one of the symbols of Cape Town. Just look at the sheer number of people. Look at Johannesburg on the left side. Look at the woman at the bottom there, Naledi. She is South Africa's foreign minister. She has gone on record. She has symbolically also see what she's wearing. They have really stood up against not just the public, but the government. That's the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, holding the Palestinian flag there. And this is very important. It gives us hope that a country that fought against apartheid and won today is and has actually always been supporting Palestine. But this gives us hope. Next. Isn't this beautiful? Zionism and the Israeli state again and again and again use Jews and the protection of Jews and the protection of Judaism as an excuse for the atrocities they're committing on Palestinians. But Jews are standing up against those atrocities. Jews are standing up against that tyranny. These are Jews in New York. There are so many Jewish organizations. I mean, I can already see at least 12 in my mind, but there are more that have really protested against what is happening. And many Jewish people have actually been arrested in Western countries for standing up to Israeli tyranny and saying that not in our name, not in our name. And I want to just tell you one thing about the Jewish groups that are standing is that there are many there, but I recently attended a meeting of the Jewish Voice for Peace, and I was amazed at the compassion they have for the Palestinian people, and how passionately they were talking about this injustice being done to them. Of course, there's the American Council for Judaism, there's Harvard Jews for Liberation, there's a lot of people. So the other thing that I want to talk about here is that when we talk of the general public supporting the Palestinian cause, and we see it in the pictures, it gives us strength, but also what gives us strength is specific groups of people. So for example, actors from Hollywood, singers, big pop stars supporting the Palestinian cause. I mentioned the journalists earlier, doctors, especially Doctors Without Borders, lawyers, international lawyers, that are supporting this cause. So that's very hopeful. Next, please. Support by Jewish organizations I've always, and now support within Israel. This is very important and something we don't hear of often, because obviously Israeli government controls what can be shown outside Israel. But, with social media and all, things are much easier now to share. But I want to talk about a couple of organizations. For example, the Anarchists Against the Wall, that's an organization. Gush Shalom is another organization. Neturi Karta Group. There are many organizations that have worked tirelessly against Zionism within Israel. Plus, there are individuals who have expressed their deep opposition to Zionism. For example, Samir mentioned Vivian Silva, who was actually killed in the October 7th attack. She worked tirelessly for Palestinian and Jewish peace, but especially highlighting that the Palestinians need to be treated better. She did it all her life. When she was killed, on October 7th, her son said, in an interview that my mother has been killed because of the failure of Israel, of what Israel has done, has not given enough importance to peace. That's why this has happened. He didn't go and badmouth the Palestinians. I would like to also talk about Meyer Baruchin, who was a high school teacher. And actually, there are more cases like his, but I want to specifically talk about his case because he is a high school civics teacher and history teacher. And all he did was that on Facebook, he put the names of Palestinians who were killed. So along with the pictures, he said, these are not nameless people. Let us remember that they were also human beings. So he was trying to humanize the suffering. He was saying this person who was killed was named this, and so on. He gave the names of people who died. And the Israeli authorities not only arrested him, they mistreated him, they put him in solitary confinement. So there are people who are standing up. And when he was interviewed, he actually said that many people want to support him, his own colleagues, but they're not doing it because of the fear of the Israeli state. So I think the fear factor is there. And then, of course, the bigger factor, like Samir mentioned, is that if you're benefiting from the system, many times you don't see the injustice that it is committing. All right. Now, I want to come to the next, which is the strengthening ties with the above. So one of the tasks I'm putting in capitals and the hopes I'm putting in small letters. So the strengthening of ties with all the above that we've talked about, outpouring of the international support. So the support that you're getting already, the specific groups like actors, journalists, doctors, lawyers, support by Jewish organizations, support within Israel, we need to strengthen those ties more as peace workers so that they're nourished and that they continue to do the work that they're doing. The next task is to protect and grow meeting spaces. So as we discussed, one of the biggest failure of any peace movement happens when there's not enough space for the adversaries to meet, for the other to interact with. So if I don't interact with the other, if I'm physically so removed from the other that I don't see him at all, then that humanity is lost, and I don't have any human connection. I don't see the face of that person. I don't see the eyes. I don't see his tears. I don't see his laughter. And so that in itself is a disconnection of human feelings right there, which will prevent peace from happening. So yes, within Israel, some people were trying to do, for example, the lady we talked about earlier, she was trying to do that, Vivian Silver. But within Israel, those opportunities are very few, hardly any. But in other countries, in the Western countries, especially where Palestinians and Israelis both are studying at universities and so on, we need to make that those spaces still exist as safe spaces, and that more such spaces are created so that human to human interaction happens, and not through the TV and the propaganda that the interaction is mostly happening. Next, please. So keeping the human feelings alive, I would say that as a peace education organization, we have come to the conclusion that just appealing to human feelings is not going to bring peace. We do have to go the legal route. We do have to talk about history. We do have to talk about very hard facts. But that doesn't mean we leave the human feelings completely alone and, we make this very technical. So Sami, actually don't click next, but go to the next slide, please. I want to show you a specific example of what I'm talking about. So there were these two children who were killed in the recent violence, and one of them was, both of them were called Umar. One with the spelling of O-M-E-R and the other O-M-A-R, and they were both 4-year-olds. Now, as peace educators, or even if we are not a peace educator, but we are interested in peace and we focus on peace, we must highlight these stories where we can actually see the exact parallel. I mean, just looking at the faces of these kids, and we are not talking Palestinian kid or Israeli kid. We are talking of Palestinian and Israeli kid together with the same name, just the difference in spelling. Which also, of course, if we look back, there is the whole cultural similarity and, historical similarity between the two religions. But so this kind of thing needs to be highlighted by us. So now I want to come to pressurizing local governments and international institutions. It's very important. You see, Israel wants us to think that the United Nations does not matter, because it says, like, we are going to do whatever we are going to do. It wants to make us think that whatever our governments say doesn't matter, but they do matter. That's why they put so much effort into propaganda. So don't fall in that trap. Keep pressurizing your governments wherever you are. If you're in South Africa, do that, because your government is already standing for Palestinian rights. But even in India, where the official stand has always been pro-Palestinian, if your prime minister today is not doing that traditional support, you need to put pressure. Wherever you are, you need to put pressure on international organizations and your local governments. Next, please. Role of the Arab kings. We often forget this in all this, because it is always made out into a Jewish and Muslim issue. But we as a peace community need to be highly critical and vocal about that criticism of the Arab kings. They are kings. They are running their own kingdoms. They don't work. They haven't done any work in their life. They are getting money for doing nothing, and they pay lip service to the Palestinian cause. They do nothing. So this is extremely important, that not only are we critical, but we make that criticism very vocal. Next, please. Keep the vocabulary secular. By this, what I mean is that, yes, there is a religious angle. Yes, Palestinians are mostly Muslims, but there are Jewish Palestinians, there are Christian Palestinians, and that they have been very vocal and supportive of the Palestinian cause. Shireen Abu Akleh was one example we've already given you. One of the biggest supporters of the Palestinian causes, Edward Said, himself a Palestinian, was also Christian. And so, we must keep this secular, especially because the Israeli state wants us to talk in religious terms. It makes it the case that, Israel exists because there is a religious commandment, which of course is debatable, and many Jews don't believe in that. But that's what Israeli state says, that the reason why Israel exists in that part of the world is because of a religious duty, a religious commandment, a religious past. So we must not fall in that trap and use that language. Next, please. Work on identity politics. That's very important, but I think it's to actually prevent. It's to prevent such things from happening in the future. So we need to work on identity politics, because identity politics is what creates fear and the support for any fascist government. And lastly, know the history. I often meet people who are very passionate about Palestine, but apart from that history of how Israeli state was made and all, they haven't paid attention to the relationship of Islam and Judaism, or the history of Zionism itself, or the profiteering from the Jewish pain, of the history of Hamas. We are very quick to say, yes, Hamas terrorist organization, bad what they did. There's a history of Hamas. I mean, they were elected. They are elected representatives of people who were then sacked. So there's all that stuff. And I would like to now go to Hindutva as the last thing. But I think before that, Samir, if you could just touch upon the history of Judaism and Islam, because I think it's important in this context.
Yeah, just very briefly, because we are pretty much out of time. But just to say that, as I believe Dr. Tripathi or Professor Bhagat, I think both of them alluded to the fact that Jews were a very persecuted minority in Christian Europe specifically. But they had a special status going back even to the time of the Prophet. Of course, there was some tensions and so on. I don't mean to say that the relationship was unstrained. There were definitely some strains. But by and large, Jews were at least allowed to live and operate and live their lives in various places that were all the way from India all the way to Spain. They were allowed to have communities and so on. And in fact, speaking of Spain, when the Christians took over Spain, they expelled the Jews. Where did those Jews end up? In the Ottoman Empire primarily. So it's a long and complicated history, but I think it's important to recognize that at a time when Jews were just being massacred all over Europe, from Russia all the way to France, they did have a refuge, they did have safe haven in lands that were controlled by Muslims. I think that's an important thing to say. Let me find the slide that you're looking for.
Yeah, I also wanted to just say that, Leila Pasha has been saying very important stuff in the chat box. I only saw it now. But yes, and Leila, we definitely would like to organize a cultural resistance program on Human Rights Day, focusing on Palestine, and also this year in Manipur, as you're saying. Yeah. I want to end with a segment on Zionism and Hindutva, simply because our work is mostly in the South Asian diaspora. So let me talk about the first similarity is that, of course, both of them are fascist, supremacist ideologies. We all know that. But another very interesting aspect, and I think I referred to it when I was talking about what my cousin said to me, is this reference to the prehistoric past. We all come from somewhere, we are all going somewhere, but we cannot use something that we think happened thousands of years ago to lay a claim today. I can perhaps understand, if it's like a couple of 100 years, 300, 400 years ago in our living memory or the living memory of our great grandparents and so on, that much I can still understand. And also one can have rules about it, that, okay, we need to look at history and the claims in that history from the time that our country became a nation state. So that prehistoric past claim is common in both the ideologies. As you know, the Babri Mosque was demolished in India because it was claimed that it was the birthplace of Ram. And similar claims have been made about many other buildings in India that have any connection with Muslims. So that claim, the prehistoric past claim is there in both. Curtailing of freedoms, once these fascist governments come to power, they obviously curtail freedoms. So they are not only imposing a tyranny on the so-called enemy, but also curtailing freedoms of people in their population. Corporatism that Samir has talked about is, there's definitely a business angle to it. And straight from the horse's mouth, by the way, Mussolini said that fascism should actually be correctly termed as corporatism. He said that, it's his own words. And it's because there's always this angle of money. So there is this angle of money, there is arms that are being sold, there is water that is being sold, there's natural gas that has been found, there are other resources, there is of course the fact that it's a very strategic place in the world, on the map for business dealings and for transport. The other thing that unites them is, of course, hate against Muslims that we've talked about, Islamophobia. But one of the big problems here is that people, when they are so blinded with hate, they refuse to see the facts. So many Indians are supporting Israel today just because they hate Muslims. And so we have to, in our own diaspora, but people who are in India also have to fight Islamophobia, not only because of Indian Muslims, but because anywhere else in the world where there will be hate against Muslims, these people who've been blinded in India will also start supporting other fascist ideologies just because they hate Muslims. And of course, we know that India has been buying arms from Israel. It's actually the biggest buyer of arms of Israel also buys spyware, then it uses it against its own activists in India, as we saw in the Bhima Koregaon case. But also now you know that Israel wants workers. I've talked about the non-violent resistance in Palestine and how Palestinians have refused to work in Israeli settlements and in factories. So Israel needs workers. And Indians are readily going there. Indians have applied for jobs. The Thais are already there, some other nationalities, but Indians are also going there. But I always want to end with hope. So the next slide, I want to show what a proud history Indians have. This is a stamp that was released in 1981 to commemorate support for the Palestinian people. India was one of the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine, just as India was one of the first countries to support the anti-apartheid struggle. You know, newly formed United Nations, India stood by the Southern African populations, you know, non-white populations, and said that this is wrong, apartheid is wrong. And also, you know, the connection between Gandhi and the whole freedom struggle in Southern Africa. I would encourage you to go to our channel and look for those resources about Gandhi in South Africa. With that, I would just like to point that, you know, what Dr. Tripathi raised earlier, that the Prime Minister of India was so fast in commenting on the October 7th violence. He stood with Israel. He refused to give any statement for Palestinians, and the foreign minister too. I mean, no, the officials, they didn't do anything. Although later on, like Dr. Tripathi said, they said, oh, but we continue with our old position. But that, you know, nothing was actually issued, old position of supporting Palestinians. But no statement was actually issued for the Palestinians. And in that respect, I would just like to read 3 quotes to you by stalwarts of the peace movement, movements around the world. The first is by Desmond Tutu, that we respect highly in Southern Africa, but he's also respected all over the world. He said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. That's what Tutu said. Then let us talk of Gandhi, that apostle of peace. He said, silence becomes cowardice when occasion demands speaking out the whole truth and acting accordingly. And last but not the least, MLK Jr., he said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And with that, my friends, I will say that make noise, make as much noise as you can, wherever you are. We have already talked of the tasks that are in front of us. We have already talked of the challenges or the difficulties we are facing as peace workers. We also saw where our hope lies. And one thing that I will like to reiterate to you is that peace, just like war, you know, needs to be made. It is not something that is the Buddha on the wall. You know, I have these 3 tiles behind me. I don't know if you can see. One is representing Islam. Then in the middle is Jesus with people, you know, he was a Palestinian Jew, as you know. And then there's a tile representing Judaism there. But you see, it shouldn't just stay on our walls. Yeah. So the fact that you took time out and attended this webinar, which was not just about, you know, like giving you a short history, it was actually about a strategy. I think it gives me hope. I'm very grateful that you all came. But I will say that when we finish this webinar, our tasks actually are listed there. We need to go on with our work wherever we are. And from the region, we understand the word salam. We understand the word shalom. So peace to all of you, peace to the world, and peace especially to the people of that region, both Palestinian and Israelis, who are going through something that most of us cannot even imagine.
Thank you, Shireen.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone.